Continuação da leitura do livro The New Map. A leitura está em inglês. Chapter 18. Dangerous Ground. In April 1933, French naval captain Georges Mismaker set sail from Saigon, in France's colony of Vietnam. The South China Sea, into which he headed, was the province of fishermen. For war trade, it was a backwater. The captain's mission was to extend the sovereignty of the free French Empire in Indochina and to its more remote outer limits. This he would do by establishing possession of a group of land features in the South China Sea, known as Spratly Islands, named for a British sea captain who, in 1843, had sighted one of them. As islands go, the Spratlys are anything but impressive quirks of geology, fly specks on the map, barely protruding above water. They combined with a perilous multitude of hidden rocks, reefs, and shoals hidden coals hidden below the waves, create innumerable danger for sailors. For 2 centuries, the area has been marked of nautical maps as a dangerous ground. Even today, U.S. government sailing instructions advise that avoidance of dangerous ground in the mariner's only guarantee of safety. Fly specks, though they may be, the Spratlys occupy critical territory on the map. They sprawl across about 160,000 square miles, an area the size of Michigan, Iowa, and Illinois combined, several hundred miles from Vietnam and slightly closer to the Philippines. They are more or less in the center of what today is the most important waterway in the world, the South China Sea. The flotilla entrusted in 1933, with its grand imperial mission, comprised just 3 ships, a gunboat, a fishing trawler, and a hydraulical boat. The mission had been ordered to prevent a foreign power from claiming sovereignty. The French were worried about the Chinese, but more so an expansionist Japan, which was trying, the French feared, to penetrate Europe-dominated waters. The French declared that their claim was watertight, based on the assertion of sovereignty made by the Vietnamese kingdom on Annan going back a century earlier. Aided by good weather, Mismaker's expedition sailed to 9 of the tiny islands, on each of which the same ritual was repeated. A proclamation of sovereignty was signed by the captain of the ships and then placed in the bottle, that it in turn was inserted into the boundary marker that was placed in the ground. And then, on each of the islands, a French flag was hoisted and then raised. At that, a trumpet was sounded. It was a lonely scene, bounded by the silence of the empty sea. Today, there is a growing struggle over sovereignty in the South China Sea, over who controls the Spratlys as well as another island group closer to China and Vietnam, called the Paracels, and other tiny land features that barely just out from the waves, and indeed the sea itself. It is a battle over a host of critical matters, oil and gas resources, both known as purported a substantial part of the world's fishing resources, control the world's most important sea lanes, and potentially the trade that goes through it. It is also about national identity, a shift in strategic balance, and the changing relationships of China, both with its neighbors and with the United States. And specifically, It is about whether naval warships pass freely or not through its waters. With all that comes the risk of armed clashes, whether intended or accidental. The South China Sea, described as the world's most critical waterways, stretches from the Indian Ocean to Asia and the Pacific Ocean. It is bordered by Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines, Vietnam, China, and Taiwan. Singapore is just beyond its limits. Through its water pass $3.5 trillion of world trade. 2/3 of China's maritime trade and over 40% of Japan's and 30% of total world trade. The flows include 15 million barrels of oil a day, almost as much as goes through the Strait of Hormuz, as well as 1/3 of the world's LNG. 80% of China's oil imports pass through it. Its waters are crucial for food security. 10% of the world's entire fish catch comes from it, 4% of its tuna. It provides much of the seafood consumed both in China, the world's largest consumer of fish, and the Southeast Asia. It has even been suggested that the value of and importance of the South China Sea's fish stocks make fish a strategic commodity. Conflicts over fisheries also inflame public opinion in the countries that border the sea. These waters are also fraught with risk. A single irresponsible action or instigation of conflict, warned Vietnam's Prime Minister, could well lead to interruption of these huge trade flows, with unforeseeable consequences not only to regional economies, but also to the entire world. By comparison, in 1933, Miss Macrae's mission was far from the center of global contention. Its objective was much simpler, to try to consolidate France's position in the region. But news traveled slowly in those days. It was only later in the year that word of the mission finally reached the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was outraged. But after a few weeks of reflection, the Chinese Military Council warned, "We need to cool down the game with the French. The reason? Our navy is weak, and these 9 islands are not useful for us now." Others, however, were hardly prepared to cool down, for the territorial integrity of China was a rallying cry for nationalists outraged by became known as the Incident of the 9 Islets. They were already mobilized by the humiliation of the unequal treaties with foreign countries beginning after the Fifth Opium War, with the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. It required a defeated China to lease Hong Kong to Britain and grant extraterritoriality, which means that British citizens would be subject to British law, not Chinese. As whole series of subsequent unequal treaties over the 19th century gave European nations, including Russia as well as Japan, preferential commercial and extraterritorial legal rights in Chinese coastal cities, along with political control within the defined concession areas. All these undermined China's sovereignty and heralded its weaknesses. A climax of the humiliation came in 1919, when the Versailles Treaty awarded Germany's Shandong concession to Japan. This ignited student demonstrations in Beijing on May 4, 1919, what became known as May 4 movement, a landmark for modern Chinese nationalism. The Republic of China, founded in 1912, was supposed to modernize the country and regain sovereignty. But by the beginning of the 1930s, China had degenerated into a fragmented country. Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the nationalists and heir of the Republic of China, was fighting both warlords and communists, In 1931, the Japanese seized control of Manchuria, where a substantial part of China's industry was located, and breached the Great Wall. In the face of this turmoil and continued dissolution, any further diminution of the Chinese authority, no matter how distant, stoked outrage and alarm. But without the naval power to counter the French advance, the Chinese government, as one historian has written, turned to warriors of another kind, its map makers. Various maps were promulgated between 1933 and 1935 that asserted Chinese sovereignty into the South China Sea, reaching almost 1,000 miles from the Chinese mainland, and with Chinese names for the various islands, in the words of the recent government document, reviewed and approved. A singular cartographic combatant led the change, by Mei Chu, one of China's most influential and respected geographers. His work was inspired not only by longitudes and latitudes, but also by nationalist passion. Loving the nation is the top priority in the learning geography, he said, while building the nation is what learning geography is for, to drive home the points and educate the country. He had already, in 1930, produced the Chinese National Humiliation Map. One of his aims, he said, was to help the common people to be patriotic. In 1936, he drew a map for his New China Construction Atlas. It included a U-shaped line, some would call it a cow tongue, that snaked down the coastline along the South China Sea, almost to the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, and everything within that line he asserted belonged to China. As he put it in an annotation, the South China Sea was the living place of Chinese fishermen. The sovereignty, of course, belonged to China. Almost 9 decades later, Bai Meichu's map is at heart of today's struggle of the South China Sea. After World War II in 1947 and 1948, the nationalist government, drawing differently on Bai Meichu's 1936 map, promulgated a new map showing China's control over the Spratlys, as well as the Paracel Islands, and going all the way down to the James Shoal, off the coast of what is today is Malaysia. This delineation, said an official statement at the time, was followed by Chinese government departments, schools, and published before the anti-Japanese war, and it was also recorded on file in the Ministry of Interior. Accordingly, it should remain unchanged. China at that time was engulfed in the climactic struggle between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists and the communists, led by Mao Zedong. The communists prevailed. Late in the afternoon, in October 1st, 1949, from atop of the Gate of Heavenly Peace in Beijing, Mao proclaimed the Communist People's Republic of China. The Chinese people have stood up, and he declared China, as Mao had put it, would no longer be a nation subject to insult and humiliation. As for Chiang Kai-shek, he escaped to Taiwan with his nationalist followers, along with many others who were fleeing the communist advance. In later decades, Taiwan became prosperous and a major source of investment in the People's Republic of China, although shadowed by the risk of forcible reunification. On the mainland, the new communist government adopted Bai Meichu map, outlining its claims for the South China Sea, today the Chinese map, and its fields of history continues to be shown as the 9-dash map. In 2013, a prominent Chinese geographer declared that Bai Meichu's map is now deeply engraved in the hearts of minds of the Chinese people. Generations of Chinese grade school students have been taught that the southernmost part of China is Zhen and Cha, otherwise known as James Stroll, an underwater reef about 50 miles off the coast of Malaysia. On the flight into China today, flip open the in-flight magazine on Air China and you will find the long Kaotong of the 9-dash line imprinted in the dark line on the map of the South China Sea, reaching all the way down to Malaysia and Indonesia.